This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. President Bush backed off and reversed course at least a bit today on a hotly contested gun control issue. Following the lead of the California legislature, he had his aides quickly announce a temporary suspension on imports of AK-47 and similar semi-automatic assault weapons, weapons increasingly used by drug traffickers and others bent on violence. CBS News White House correspondent Leslie Stahl reports on what's behind Mr. Bush's sudden change from just a few weeks ago when he defended these guns as hunting and sporting equipment.
The Bush administration's about-face responds to public pressure, which has grown ever since a gunman in Stockton, California, killed 5 school children and wounded 29 with a legally imported Chinese-made semi-automatic AK-47. The action today immediately suspends the importation of 5 makes of these assault weapons, including AK-47s and Uzis. But it isn't a ban. It could be lifted if importers can show the weapons are suitable for sporting purposes.
There is a percentage of them that are being used for criminal purposes, that are being used by narcotics traffickers, that are being used by the street gangs in L.A. and other cities in this country.
The statistics are alarming. 3 years ago, just 4,000 semi-automatic rifles were imported into the U.S. 2 years ago, it jumped to 40,000 and 44,000 last year. In just the beginning of this year, the numbers have skyrocketed. 113,000 requests to import just one type of these weapons.
We are concerned that these weapons are not being used for sporting purpose.
For President Bush, a member of the National Rifle Association, today's move was a dramatic turnaround from a position he took less than a month ago.
I would strongly go after the criminals who use these guns, but I'm not about to suggest that a semi-automated hunting rifle be banned. Absolutely not.
That statement put the president at odds with police officials across the country, with his own drug czar, William Bennett, and with his wife, Barbara Bush, who said she supports a ban.
I think the president understands that the people of this country are fed up with the drug dealers and the drug czars having these assault weapons.
The NRA says today's action should put an end to moves aimed at a total ban, but others say that's just what's needed. Since 1/4 of these weapons in circulation are imported, most of them are made in the USA. Leslie Stahl, CBS News, the White House.
The weapons covered by today's temporary import suspension have framed the target of the latest long gun control debate, long guns as opposed to pistols, a weapon that has blurred the usual lines between supporters and opponents of gun control. This is an AK-47. Technically, it's a semi-automatic weapon, but it fires much like a machine gun, firing a hail of bullets in just seconds. On the streets, they have become the weapon of choice, part of the criminal arsenal, the symbol of the escalating arms race between drug dealers and the police. But automatic weapons have also invaded neighborhoods far from the front lines in the criminal wars. The Stockton, California massacre had 2 immediate results. Sales of automatic weapons skyrocketed, and the gun control debate increased. In gun shops and rifle ranges this afternoon, there was a mixed reaction to the government's new ban.
I'm actually happy that they're going to take a reasoned approach and determine which rifles are legitimate and which not.
A car can be a deadly weapon. If the man would have used a Chevrolet Impala in Stockton, California, they would not be banning Chevrolet Impalas today.
And I don't think this decision is going to affect one way or the other what's in the public's hands. Certainly it's not going to affect crime at all.
There are times when American neighborhoods look like battlegrounds, the numbers of weapons increasing steadily, along with the casualties. AK-47s and Uzis have added to the body count. The police feel they are outgunned and are answering back with increased firepower of their own.
Well, I think law enforcement needs to have as many tools as they can to combat criminal violations or violent acts. And I think what they come up with is going to help law enforcement do this, and also keep the law enforcement officer, especially the officer in the blue uniform, from getting shot on the street.
The 200,000-member National Association of Police Organizations is on record supporting a ban on the AK-47 and similar assault weapons. Los Angeles Police Chief Daryl Gates, otherwise an opponent of gun control, also supports the ban on these weapons. I spoke with him a short while ago.
We had an officer shot at just the other night with one of these weapons. They're simply too dangerous for the streets of this city or any city in the United States.
Chief, what about your friends with the National Rifle Association who say, listen, the Chief's a good man, but on this one he's sold out?
Well, I don't know how many of them are still good friends, but no, I haven't sold out. I'm still opposed to gun control. I think, and I guess what's really bothered me is that these individuals who, in most instances, are, once again, sound thinkers, conservative thinkers, very reasonable, that they haven't been in the front of this. I would have expected them to be out in front of this, providing some sense to all of this. They're hunters, they're people who use these weapons in a very, very responsible way, and these weapons have not been used in a responsible way, and their pure existence is something that should have been taken care of before this time.
Los Angeles Police Chief Daryl Gates. Grapes and other fresh fruit from Chile today disappeared nationwide from American supermarkets and mom-and-pop stores on the corner. That followed a U.S. government warning about possible cyanide tampering. The concern spread as Canada, Japan, and West Germany all joined in banning Chilean fruit. And Chile itself halted shipments of its second most valuable export. No sickness has so far been traced to the fruit, but the economic damage was immediate here and abroad. CBS News correspondent Eric Ingberg begins our coverage.
Federal officials responsible for protecting America's food, facing one of their worst nightmares, an act of terrorism, today mounted an unprecedented food hunt, searching for more cyanide in Chilean fruit, even as grocery stores reacted to government warnings to pull all fruit from Chile off their shelves.
The best advice that I can give is to be safe, not sorry. Don't consume any fresh fruit from Chile, and don't panic on the other hand.
No other poisoning cases have turned up since federal agents found 2 red Chilean grapes laced with cyanide in Philadelphia.
You can see a puncture of the grape and then surrounded by a white circle. We saw these grapes, we identified them, brought them into the lab, and those were the ones that were positive for cyanide.
The poisoned grapes were part of a shipment of almost 300,000 crates of grapes in the hold of one ship in the port of Philadelphia.
Finding of the cyanide, it was 1,000,000 to 1, and yes, it is 1,000,000 to 1.
Because most non-citrus fruit sold in the U.S. at this time of the year is from Chile, the cyanide scare stripped many stores down to their empty shelves.
We've pulled off everything that's been recommended: white and red grapes, nectarines, peaches, raspberries, anything with a Chilean label on it.
In New York's produce markets, wholesalers lacking any sure way to get refunds from Chile were up in arms.
Would I eat them? Yeah. Sure. Want to see me eat them? Yeah, right here. Here you got it. Here you go. I'm afraid. Here's Chileans.
As arriving Chilean food like this landing at Miami was shunted aside for testing, analysts said the scare will not raise prices because the U.S. crop will be coming to market in a few weeks. Enforcement officials had first dismissed the food threat as a hoax. Now, while the amount of cyanide found in the 2 grapes was not enough to make an adult sick, they acknowledge they have a full-blown crisis on their hands. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Washington.
In the port of Valparaiso, they were loading up the last ship for Philadelphia today. In the hopes of recovering at least some revenue, the Kudu set sail at 1 o'clock this afternoon, carrying a cargo of black grapes, just like the ones that were found contaminated with cyanide. Left behind was a port filled with trucks loaded with fruit that may never leave Chile. The news that most of Chile's markets have effectively shut their doors to the country's most important export after copper was a blow to the heart of the Chilean economy. The military government of General Augusto Pinochet has staked much of Chile's economic growth on the boom in exports of everything from grapes to kiwi fruit. The press called the effective halt in exports a catastrophe. The current crisis has touched off a wave of accusations and counter-accusations. In a nationally televised speech last night, the Interior Minister called the damage unprecedented. He blamed communist-backed terrorists for poisoning the grapes found in Philadelphia. The Communist Party said pesticides were to blame and accused the government of lax quality controls. Some of the inspection stations were already shut down today. Inspectors at the U.S. Department of Agriculture station in Valparaiso wouldn't comment on the current crisis. Chilean exporters weren't talking much either. packing plants were at a standstill. Chilean authorities say the worldwide precautions being taken are completely unwarranted. Santiago fruit markets were as busy as ever, and some customers even made jokes about foreign concerns. Chilean officials say they hope the FDA will lift the warning soon, but they also say it will take a long time before they can get Americans, the biggest consumers of Chilean fruit, back to the produce shelves. Frederick Tice, CBS News, Santiago.
And still to come on the CBS Evening News, Susan Spencer on disappointing news for victims of the disease AIDS. And Jerry Bowen on all the things we used to believe in: Mom, the flag, Elvis, and apples. Disturbing questions tonight about the only federally approved drug used to treat AIDS. These questions arise from research conducted by the drug's manufacturer. Now, AIDS specialists caution that people using the drug and benefiting from it, quote, should not panic. CBS News medical correspondent Susan Spencer has been working to sort out the findings.
An unpublished study likely to send shockwaves through the AIDS community has found that in the lab, the AIDS virus can become resistant to AZT, potentially limiting the usefulness of the only government-approved drug for AIDS.
The virus is mutated so that it grows in the presence of much higher concentrations of AZT.
Researchers stress that the study was small and that it's still unclear how often the virus changes or, when it does, how long it takes. Information of vital interest to the more than 20,000 AIDS patients who are on the drug.
Well, it doesn't mean we can't depend on AZT. What it means is we need to understand both the benefit and the optimal use of AZT as well as the limitations of AZT.
The drug's manufacturer sought to explain to doctors that despite these new limitations, AZT still prolongs life, and that even when the virus changes, people don't seem to get any sicker. In a Dear Doctor letter, the company cited the opinions of outside experts that for now, quote, these findings do not in themselves require alterations in patient therapy.
Any decisions regarding patient therapy have to really be personal decisions between the patient and his private physician.
Other researchers added that many viruses learn to elude a specific drug. This report is likely to further encourage using AZT with something else.
We know that combinations of different drugs allow us often to overcome the resistance to a single drug.
The study's most immediate impact may be on the 1.5 million Americans infected with AIDS, but not yet sick, many of whom are eager to take AZT in hopes of slowing the virus down. They now may be much more reluctant to take that gamble. Susan Spencer, CBS News, Washington.
The government today said the deficit in its broadest measure of foreign trade narrowed last year by 12%, down to $135 billion. That was the first improvement in the U.S. balance of payments since 1981. A puzzling electrical power system problem aboard Space Shuttle Discovery today. Mysterious pressure readings on a hydrogen tank forced the astronauts to conserve power and shut down some equipment. NASA troubleshooters are optimistic that this won't force any early out from orbit on Friday. The mission is scheduled to end on Saturday. Aside from their own troubles, the astronauts spent part of the day documenting the Earth's troubles, photographing signs of environmental damage down below. The Senate Armed Services Committee opened confirmation hearings today on Congressman Richard Cheney of Wyoming, President Bush's second choice for Defense Secretary. From all indications, the Cheney nomination is on a friendly fast track in the Senate after the long and bitter John Tower nomination fight. Cheney's recovery from 3 heart attacks and his lack of any hands-on experience with defense policy appeared to pose no major problems today. Armed Services Committee Chairman Sam Nunn indicated that Cheney's confirmation by the full Senate would conceivably come by Friday before the 2-week Easter recess. A federal jury in Washington, D.C. today convicted a Lebanese man of hijacking and hostage-taking. The trial was the first test of a law allowing prosecution in the U.S. for terrorist acts against Americans overseas. CBS News reporter Linda Terra covered the verdict.
Government prosecutors asked the jury to send a message with its verdict in the trial of accused hijacker Fawaz Yunus. After 2.5 days of deliberations, it did, finding Yunus guilty on 3 counts: conspiracy, hostage-taking, and air piracy, and not guilty on 3 other charges: assault, damaging an aircraft, and placing a destructive device on the aircraft.
The verdict demonstrates that the United States can effectively apply the rule of law to terrorist acts regardless of where they occur and regardless of where the terrorist hides.
Yunus, a Lebanese Shiite Muslim, was the first person to stand trial in the U.S. for an overseas hijacking in which American citizens were the victims.
I think it's a ridiculous case. He's got no business being here. The United States has no business whatsoever dealing with this kind of case. It wasn't about the United States.
The real legal victory is in the fact that we brought him back under the rule of law.
Witnesses, including 2 American passengers, identified Yunus as the leader of 5 men who stormed this Royal Jordanian airliner brandishing assault rifles. The defense argued that in carrying out the hijacking, Yunus was not a terrorist but was a soldier, following what he believed were legal military orders of the Amal militia. After the 30-hour ordeal, the passengers and crew were released and the plane was blown up. Yunus was arrested more than 2 years later when undercover FBI agents lured him with drugs to a yacht off Cyprus. During the arrest, agents broke both of Yunus's wrists.
No date has been set for sentencing, but the most serious of the charges, hostage-taking, carries the possibility of life in prison. Linda Tyrus, CBS News, Washington.
Hundreds of artillery shells rained on residential areas of Beirut today as Christian and Muslim forces renewed their struggle for control of that country. At least 39 people were killed, 100 wounded as the shelling struck homes, schools, businesses, and cars. Most of the victims in Lebanon were civilians, including at least 2 school children. In an Indiana town today, blue ribbons are the symbol of tragedy. They are reminders of a woman who foretold her own violent death and of state and local government officials who did nothing to prevent it. Bob McNamara reports.
The funeral for an Indiana woman viciously beaten to death, allegedly by her ex-husband during his 8-hour prison furlough. It's a case that suspended all Indiana prison furloughs and brought calls for capital punishment.
Cold-blooded, premeditated, brutal slayings are the reason that we have the death penalty on the statute books in the state of Indiana.
11 days ago, this was the crime scene. Witnesses telling how David Matheny chased Lisa Bianco from her Mishawaka house, then beat her to death with a shotgun in front of their 2 young daughters and neighbors. Surrendering shortly after the murder, Matheny's face later showed the effects of what police say was a beating by other inmates.
The only thing that I would like to see is me pulling the switch. I want him to get the death penalty. I want everything that the law allows. I don't want no temporary insanity plea because he knew exactly what he was doing.
For years, 29-year-old Lisa Bianco, mother of 2, was a terrorized, battered wife. And though she divorced the 38-year-old Matheny 5 years ago, his brutality continued. The evidence as recent as 2 years ago in a video deposition when a bruised Lisa Bianco predicted her own fate.
I'm afraid that if he does get a hold of me again, I'm not going to be able to talk him out of it.
Sentenced to 8 years at this Indiana prison after beating Bianco and kidnapping their daughters, Matheny didn't disguise the hate for his ex-wife.
He stated that he would kill her whenever he had a chance, whenever he got out.
At a shelter for battered women where Bianco counseled, friends say as late as a week before her death, she asked prison officials to warn her when Matheny was furloughed, but she was never told. An example, women's advocates say, of the low priority domestic violence cases have.
Very clear. The message from the police, the message from the courts is, do whatever you want. We are not going to stop you.
But Indiana's governor has promised Bianco's mother action.
I assured her that I would do whatever it took to make sure that those who were responsible for this were punished and that it would never, ever be allowed to happen again.
While prosecutors may decide this week whether to seek the death penalty against Matheny, 7 Indiana corrections officials face hearings on why a potential killer was briefly set free. In the meantime, blue ribbons, Lisa Bianco's favorite color, are tied to her memory and tragedy around her hometown. Bob McNamara, CBS News, Chicago.
compared the Subaru Justy ECVT.
The U.S. moved to have all fruit from Chile pulled because of a couple of grapes with cyanide traces. The big domestic apple debate drags on. Chicago today joined New York and Los Angeles in pulling apple products from public school cafeterias. With all this in mind, CBS News correspondent Jerry Bowen looks tonight at the growing feeling that eating, drinking, and even breathing may be hazardous to your health.
Time was in this country when you knew what you could count on, what was good and wholesome and American. Remember, Mom?
Come along, Angel.
And since I just worked my butt off for 8 hours, now I gotta go make dinner. Maybe you could pitch in, huh?
Well, motherhood's taking a beating these days, and so's the flag. They're displaying it like a doormat in Chicago. And now they tell us the only safe way to have an apple pie is without apples. Send a kid to school with an apple, and he could wind up getting busted for possession of a dangerous fruit. A dozen school districts nationwide have banned apples because of safety concerns.
And the uncertainty doesn't stop at the border. We got this letter today from the Chilean Winter Fruit Association, boasting that Chile's apples are safe to eat. But what's this about their grapes?
It used to be so simple. Just don't do too much of this or this. Now you can be done in by the nitrites in bacon, the cholesterol in eggs, and only a scientist knows what in your water. Listen to all the experts, and you'd think the sky was falling. It's not. It's dissolving, the ozone problem. Oh, sure, you can run, but you can't hide. There's nowhere to go. There's radon in the basement, asbestos in the attic, too much sun outside. And now it's the apple thing. If you can't trust an apple, what can you trust? What can you count on? Well, 3 things. 1, it never snows in Los Angeles.
How do you make snowballs? How do you make snowballs?
2, Elvis is definitely dead.
Now, you saw Elvis where?
In the grocery store.
And 3, they do live happily ever after. They just take separate vacations. Jerry Bowen, CBS News, Los Angeles.
And that's tonight's CBS Evening News. See you tomorrow. Good night.
This is CBS.
Did your father always